Hello there, people of the internet. I've made a couple of videos not too terribly long ago talking about how great of a cartridge 5.56 actually is whenever it has a proper setup. And I've had a lot of people tell me, if 5.56 is so great, why are we moving on to this 277 Fury round? If you don't know, the 277 Fury is essentially the next cartridge that the United States military is adopting, and they want to replace 7.62 NATO and 5.56 NATO with that cartridge, so we have just this universal standard one do everything cartridge. And we're kind of ignoring lessons that we've learned before in terms of the intermediate cartridge versus something like a full power rifle cartridge, and I absolutely would classify this 277 Fury round as a full power rifle cartridge. So on the civilian market, you don't see all that much of a difference from 308 to the 277 round unless you start looking at like really long distances. But from a military perspective, we have a whole new evolution of ammunition. With my discussions talking about 5.56, I'll talk about how 5.56 from a 20-inch barrel, if you're using 55 grain bullets from a 20-inch barrel with a 1 in 12 twist, in a human torso-sized target, that level of gelatinous material, you're going to get a similar wound track than what you would get with 308. And whenever I talk about things in benefits of 5.56, people will come out of the woodwork and ask, why 277 Fury then? The 277 Fury, the military version of it, is a completely new development in firearms and cartridge technology. It is not like comparing 5.56 to 308. If the military was going back to 308 or 7.62 NATO, then you could make that argument of, if 5.56 is so great, like you say it is, why are we going back to 308? But that's not what we're doing. We are going to 277 Fury, and it is a two-piece case. It's a brass case with a steel base on it that is designed to fire at, what, 80,000 PSI, which is a ridiculously high pressure for a cartridge to be fired, especially in a semi-automatic rifle. And the reason why these pressures are so high is because we want to get an adequate amount of velocity from a very short barrel. I think the military's SIG rifles that they're adopting are like a 13-inch barrel, and they want to get really adequate velocities from these barrels. On top of that, with the cartridge and the rifle, they're also adopting a new optic system that essentially turns everybody into a sniper, like the ability to shoot out to 900 yards for even the untrained person, because the optic does all of the calculating and zeroing of the rifle for you. Even an untrained person can shoot out to extraordinarily long distances. We are adopting this 277 Fury cartridge, but it's not just the arguments of the cartridge itself. That cartridge is based around the rifle and the optic that we are also adopting. If we kept something like the 5.56 but adopted a rifle that was electrically configured through an optic system to fire out to 900 plus yards, then the 5.56 would just not be adequate for those distances. And with the technology that we have right now on our modern battlefields, the distances most combat is taking place at is, what, 300 yards and in? Even like between modern military forces, just because that is typically the line of sight of what people are capable of seeing. Like anything beyond 300 yards, you can't really tell what it is. But as things get closer than that, that's whenever you're like, all right, we're gonna lay down some fire on this. And so as a result of that, throughout, you know, all of history of what we'd consider modern warfare, include like that basically just equates to warfare with smokeless powder firearms, it was foreseen that with smokeless powder, combat would be taking place at really, really far distances. But we just haven't seen that. However, we got modern technology to allow us to be able to effectively fight at these distances now, and so we need a cartridge to be able to effectively touch out to those distances now. And because of that right there, that is why we're adopting that 6.8 277 Fury round. It's not necessarily because the 5.56 is an inaccurate or an Inadequate? Yeah, inadequate cartridge, which it is in the modern military standing of, say, M855 or M855A1 through a short M4 14.5-inch barrel with a 1 in 7 twist. You throw that same exact cartridge into something like a 1 in 9 or potentially even 1 in 10 twist barrel, and you're going to have a dramatically more effective platform, especially if you adopt a 20-inch. And I think that is the way that we should go in terms of capabilities with the firearms, because I'm not so sure that even with those advanced optics systems and sighting systems, I'm not so sure that 900 yards is going to be the fighting distances for most people. I think that in terms of actual engagements and whatnot, it's still going to be pretty gosh darn close. Ignoring the ideas of why an intermediate rifle cartridge was adopted, which the United States is currently doing, we cannot deny that we have better technology nowadays, but I still think that humans are gonna human, and I think that we're going to see a lot of conflicts happening within, say, 300 yards. And I think that a lot of people are going to decide to themselves that this full power rifle cartridge made to touch out to long distances just is not ideal for most of the situations that most instances are going to take place at. Now, the idea with the rifle and being able to touch out to long distances comes from our time over in the deserts of Afghanistan and whatnot, where there was just these vast wastelands, essentially, where you could shoot at 1,000 yards, and for the most part, with something like green tip from an M4 barrel, that's just not going to be effective shooting at those distances. In an instant like that, I would foresee, yes, adopting something that has a more powerful round, which is one of the reasons why they used a lot of 308 rifles out there versus the 5.56 rifles, to be able to touch out to those long distances. However, unless we're talking about a theater where you're shooting really, really long distances like that, through insurrection warfare, not pure-on-pure warfare, where you're probably going to be digging trenches like what we see going on right now in several places around the world, actually. In instances like that, I'm still going to predict that we're going to see combat happening within 300 yards, even with that modern technology that we have available to us. But the adoption of the 277 Fury cartridge is not because the 5.56 is an inadequate round. The adoption of the 277 Fury cartridge is because we adopted a new rifle with new optics, and we're adopting a new system to be able to touch out to very long distances very easily. And the 5.56 is just not a cartridge that's designed for that. And that's why we're adopting a new round, because we're moving on to a completely different platform with a completely different setup to fight a war that we're not fighting anymore. It's designed, like, firearms technology always seems to be designed for the previous war. Like, for example, the M1 Garand. This right here was a fantastic rifle in the Second World War, but the M14 that came after it was designed around the warfare that we saw in World War II. And so whenever you throw that rifle into the jungles of Vietnam, it saw some problems, which is why we adopted the M16. It's just, you got to take into account what it is that the rifle is going to be doing, and that's one of the big issues. There's no one do-everything rifle. If you're, say, in the jungles of Vietnam, then something like an M16 or even an M4 with, say, 77 grain bullets would probably be ideal. But if you are over in Afghanistan where you're shooting really, really long distances, maybe something like an M14 rifle would be ideal. You got to pay attention to what the firearm's going to be doing. You can't just adopt a one do-all everything gun, because there is no one do-all everything gun. And that's one of the lessons that we just haven't learned yet. And so as a result, we're adopting the 277 Fury cartridge, and we decided to ourselves, for whatever reason, to give it to absolutely everybody. We'll see how well that works out. Don't know how well it's going to work out, but that is the cards that we have currently been dealt. So thanks for watching, folks. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off. Have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you on the next episode. done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.